All right, welcome, friends. It's week 4 with Dr. G here in Christian Ethics. Welcome back. Glad you're tuning in. Congratulations on reaching the midpoint of the course in a 7-week course. Week 4 is about halfway through. So you're doing great. Appreciate all your hard work. We are in the Ray text again, and will be for the rest of this course. And I just want to remind you that at this point, week 3, which was last week, really marks a demarcation point in the following through on the text in a very specific and 1-week limited way. That is to say, last week, remember that the outline that you need to print, and ideally, kind of the pattern for this weekly stuff is to read, watch the video with the outline printed, and then read again if you can afford that time and energy. Especially hope that you did that for week 3. But if you're able to follow that pattern throughout, it's really fruitful. All that to say that week 3 marks a point in the course that in my on-ground courses, ethics, philosophy, and other philosophically related courses, I spend about 3/4 of the time of 15, 16 weeks in a very interesting exercise with students, forcing them to dig into and to own the essential principles of the course. In a 16-week course, for instance, on philosophy, there's a point in the class early on where I require students to break up into groups. And I tell them, I lay out a system that we're going to use, some rules of the road, and I say, look, guys, I'm going to come around and supervise your conversations around specific questions from each of these chapters. But here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to give you any answers, because it's your job to dig them out. And in a group context, sort them out and suss them out and prioritize them and assess them and analyze them so that you grapple with the material and own it. It's no good for me to just sit here and give you the answers and teach you what to think. Remember, philosophy and ethics is included in philosophy as a category of knowledge, as the primary category of foundational second-order knowledge. We're talking about constantly not just what we think, but how we think, the framework of thought. And part of the difficulty of ethics and philosophical courses, philosophy courses in general, is that you really are challenging in the course your frameworks, not just your content, right? You're not just picking up content and learning what to regurgitate. You're looking at the framework of thought in your intellect and you're saying, am I thinking about this content properly and correctly? Not just what am I thinking, but how am I thinking about what I'm thinking, okay? So week 3, I appreciate your courage and strength. In week 3, we didn't follow through on the outline by design, meaning the outline does not follow the chapter logic and order of content specifically. It jumps around. And that's by design to get you to do what I just described I do over the course of weeks with students in class. You've got to dig into the foundations of ethics, and you've got to consider carefully that 7 pages of ethical systems and thought and framework, and you've got to own that if you're going to be successful going forward in this class in the weeks ahead. All right? So again, I thank you for your courage. I appreciate your strength and diligence. It's a tough way to have to go in such a short course. I get that. But it is critically important out of week 3 to have that outline in front of you, have diligently made your own notes so that you can, kind of impress all of those systems and frameworks of thought and principles into your mind so that you have a working playbook for ethics and what, a Christian ethic is as opposed to other ethical systems or where they come from, so that you can consider carefully on any given ethical dilemma, not just what's being discussed, but from what perspectives others are discussing these issues and how we can come at those issues as those who hold to a Christian worldview that has a specific ethic rooted in it, okay? So all that to say, good job. And hang in there. We're going to go back to following the order of the book here in week 4, and we're going to talk about beginning today, week 4, right? The Ray textbook, what it means to have a model for making moral decisions. And then we're going to talk through some specific issues of beginning of life. And in fact, in this video, I'm only going to talk about the model for moral decision making. I'm going to leave it up to you to dig into abortion, embryo and stem cell research, and reproductive technologies on your own using the outline that I've provided and digging through the chapters 4 through 6 to bring out all of that information and to begin to assimilate and analyze it for yourselves. The reason is, again, I'm trying to keep these videos short so as to encourage you, again, to own and to dig in and to read and to view and to review and to read again all this content material, all the while thinking about how you're thinking and if you're thinking in alignment with a Christian worldview about ethical dilemmas. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about making ethical decisions. The model that's offered up in the Ray textbook, I think, is outstanding. It's very simple but very profound, and it begins, like so many philosophical discussions and reflections, with definitions. And I want to read to you from page 111 what Scott Ray calls an ethical dilemma, how he defines it, because it is important to get our definitions straight. He says on page 111, first paragraph, middle of the way through, that an ethical dilemma is a conflict between two or more value or virtue-driven interests. A conflict between two or more value or virtue-driven interests. Okay? So, again, thinking in terms of ethical thought process and thought form. He provides a model that has 7 different parts, and I just want to go through those briefly now, that really have behind them the combination, the matrix that we're using, a purpose by which, or a purpose goal as such, of sorting out the values and virtues that are in conflict and making a decision about a dilemma where one or more options or choice sets or pathways lies before us to proceed through. Making a set of decisions that is reflective of your own Christian worldview. Now, again, this model can be used for any of the ethical worldviews, but of course in this class we're using it from a distinctly Christ-like ethical framework or matrix. But the whole point, the whole purpose of this moral model or ethical dilemma decision-making model is to help us to have a process by which we go through to make a decision, to take a set of actions, which is what decision-making is all about. It's not just here that we're concerned about changing things, right? Making a choice, but actually acting upon that choice then to see it fleshed out. So that's the whole purpose. And again, the model is a really good one. Let's begin by looking at, and I would encourage you to review and review as many times as you need to, pages 111 and following, because he'll detail out all of this. But let's look at the 7 steps for executing a model of decision-making in light of an ethical dilemma. An ethical dilemma being, again, where one or more value or virtue-driven issues are in conflict, right? There are opposing points of view about what to do next in a situation, and they're coming potentially from very different places ethically. How do we proceed? How do we make a decision? How do we solve a problem or develop circumstances in a way that reflect wisdom and a Christian ethical worldview as we seek to solve an issue that is before us in real life? Well, the first thing the author says is to gather the facts, and that's really key and important. What do we know? What do we need to know? And is this truly an ethical dilemma? Remember the definition of an ethical dilemma. Because sometimes we run into, he'll suggest, and it's true, a strategic dilemma, not an ethical one. That is to say, there's a problem, but maybe there's a way to get around the problem without having to make a choice that, divorces certain aspects of the concerns from others unnecessarily. In other words, with integrity, move around or strategically through the problem and resolve it in a different way than making hard moral choices. When that's appropriate, you need to know that that's the kind of dilemma you're looking at, not a true ethical dilemma. And you do that by gathering the facts. The second step is determine the ethical issues. That is to say, asking what's at stake and what are the competing values or virtues that are running head to head in this circumstance that need to be sorted out. Determine the ethical issues. What's really the rub here? What is the issue or issues that are being threatened in such a way that the consequence of a certain course of action as opposed to another will lead to a less than positive or even destructive end versus a more positive or constructive end? The third step is to determine what virtues or principles have a bearing on the case. That is to say, what are the real principles, the most relevant principles to this particular circumstantial issue, this ethical dilemma, and then what priority do we find for them, in terms of an application of the principles to the problem. A classic example of this is the ongoing argument about the necessity to lie sometimes when a greater good is at stake. For instance, when those families and people that hid Jewish refugees from the Nazis during World War II lied to the Nazis about the presence of these people in their homes. Yeah, lying was wrong, but a greater consideration, the life of these people, was at stake, and so the lying was justified. These kinds of ethical dilemmas where there are conflicting values and virtues and a hierarchy of those values and virtues toward specific, most important ends, these are the kinds of things that emerge when you determine what the values, virtues, principles at stake really are, and which is the most important one in this particular situation. Step 4 is to list the alternatives. Okay, now you've got an idea of, you've got a problem, you've got some principles and values and virtues that apply to this problem. We kind of bullet point them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever the number might be. Now, what are some of the alternatives here to solving this? That is to say, how can we combine these different virtues and values in their priority scheme in a way that solves the problem? And how many ways can we do that? How many combinations? How many variations on the theme? And typically, the more the better, because the more the better means the more options you have to choose from to get to an end result that is desirable. Point 5, or step 5, is to compare the alternatives with the virtues and the principles. That is to say, eliminate then, once you've come up with all the potential options, the less meritorious ones, the less virtuous choices, the less productive, positive, constructive ones from the more constructive and positive ones. And then, point 6, consider the consequences, obviously. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky for Christians from a Christian worldview. And that is to say, in asking the question, what will be the consequence if we take this decision and apply it, or this decision and apply it, we move down this pathway as over against this pathway, what's the consequence going to be? Sometimes the consequences for the Christian worldview are not immediately the most positive or desirable, but they are the ones you have to embrace to get to the higher purpose. Again, embracing persecution for the sake of the truth, for instance, would be sometimes required of a Christian in a way that is not required for anyone else necessarily. That's what I'm talking about. See, we're not, as Christians, consequence-driven ethicists. That is to say, there is an ethic, right? We've looked at it, that deals first with the consequence and works backwards. That's not what we're about. Why? Because one of the dangers of consequential ethics is the idea that opportunism plays a huge part. That is to say, when you see an opportunity to get a certain consequence, you're willing to take that opportunity regardless, right? This whole idea of, the means justifies the end. Well, for Christians, that's not good enough. So that would be one example of being careful to sort out the consequence, and always and ever holding the consequence as, the end result possibility, that's important. But in light of the virtues and values and principles, especially biblical principles, which always take precedence first. Lastly, make a decision. you know, for us in this generation, and I'm talking about Generation Z and even millennials, making a decision can be a difficult thing. Because making a decision is not just saying, okay, I'm going to think this way about this problem. It's saying I'm going to take action based on a change of thought, a change of mind, or a confirmation of what I was thinking. I'm going to take action by making a decision. A decision is an action statement. A decision is an action that we take. It's not just the thought process that turns over in our mind and we say, okay, now that's done, let's move on. This whole point of resolving an ethical dilemma is the deciding of taking an action and moving down a pathway that reaches a consequence that is the most, best, highest desirable consequence for resolving the dilemma fairly as possible, and as reasonably as possible given the ethical matrix being applied. Okay? So those are your 7 steps. That's how you make an ethical decision. I would encourage you again to read through the rest of this week's text with an eye toward applying that model, working through the complex issues, especially related to abortion, but all the beginning of life issues, and beginning to practice a moral, ethical model for decision making, as Ray suggested. It's a great tool. And from this point forward in the course, as we look at all the complex issues, it's a tool we're going to use again and again. Okay? So thanks for paying attention. Thanks for hanging in there. Good job. Good work. Keep it up. We'll see you next time.